Hey guys, welcome to AP Language and Composition. This is one of several videos that I'm going to be making for preparation for the course, as well as review for the course in case that's something that you want to go back and review, like basic material that is important as you're getting ready for the AP test. Obviously, this is not a comprehensive view of all the knowledge that you need for the course, but rather it's either a starting point or if you've already taken the course, it's a great place where you can come and kind of refresh your memory on things. So today we're going to be covering rhetorical analysis. This will be the first of two lessons on rhetorical analysis, and I'm building in references to our textbook, The Language of Composition, as I go through some of this important information. So let's get started. First of all, let's remember what the rhetorical situation is. So before you do any rhetorical analysis, you really need to figure out what that rhetorical situation is. If you're going to try to analyze something without the rhetorical situation, then you're probably going to end up oversimplifying or completely missing the mark. So where we want to start with the rhetorical situation is to remember one thing, that rhetoric is a means of persuasion, that at its core, when we're talking about rhetoric, rhetoric is meant to persuade another person to believe something or to do something or to think something or to feel in a certain way. So there's always that kind of underlying persuasive element to rhetoric. And understanding the situation requires you to remember that whatever the situation is, there's this undercurrent of persuasion that's running through it. So different types of rhetoric then that might be used as this means of persuasion include a wide range of language uses, ranging from written uses of language such as, but not limited to, essays and books and reports, to spoken uses of language such as, again, but not limited to, speeches, debates, and discussions. Obviously, we have other spoken means of language, right? Just, when we interact with our friends and things like that, which may also use forms of language. Arguments that we have with, either formal arguments or informal arguments would be another one. And then we also have visual language, which most commonly shows up in cartoons, specifically political cartoons. Different forms of art can be seen rhetorically, depending, especially, really important works of art. Graphs can be seen rhetorically. Oftentimes, graphs are attempting to convince a reader or a viewer of a certain idea. Graphs and charts, obviously go hand in hand. So you really have to look at those as, in terms of not just are they presenting information, but are they trying to convince me of something? And then there are other forms of media, such as the news, entertainment. Right now, memes are a pretty big deal, but, who knows what those things are going to evolve into in the future as we continue to experience different forms of rhetoric. But what we want to remember is that always, 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 there's some element of persuasion going on underneath them. So once we do that, then we can start to break down the persuasive impacts that these forms of media are having. And we do that by looking at different aspects of rhetoric. The first aspect that we would want to look at is the occasion, so the when and where of the piece of rhetoric. If it's an essay, oftentimes you'll have a date, but you might not have a where, but you might, by looking at who the author is, then you can, maybe make some assumptions about what the where is, or where the where is. But you always want to know, because that occasion is going to affect the choices that the person creating the rhetoric or making the statements are, how they're saying it, why they're saying it in a certain way, and all of that. The next thing that we would want to know is just more about the consequence, or sorry, about the context of the piece of rhetoric. So what are the circumstances under which it was written, or that the speech was given, or that the cartoon was created. What was the atmosphere, the political atmosphere, the you know the um, I always default to political atmosphere, but you could just say the cultural atmosphere. What was going on? What were people's attitudes at the time that this was created? Because that's going to affect uh, the type of persuasion that it's attempting to do. What was the purpose? And this is a little bit tricky because the purpose can be broken down into primary and secondary. So we know that the primary purpose is always going to be some form of persuasion, right? What is it trying to get us to do or to think or believe or to feel? But then there's often a secondary purpose. And often also, the creator of the rhetoric will supplant the secondary purpose as the primary purpose, where they'll say, well, I'm just trying to inform, or I'm just trying to entertain, or I'm just trying to engage the audience. Whereas in reality, if it's a true piece of rhetoric, that information or that entertainment or that mockery is secondary to the primary purpose, which is to persuade somebody to do or think or believe something. So always think in terms of what is this piece of rhetoric trying to convince me to do? And then the secondary purpose is, well, how is it doing that? Well, it's convincing me to do this thing by entertaining me on the subject, or it's making me believe this perspective by mocking the other side. And that is how we should be looking at how rhetoric is being put together. We also would want to look at the persona of the speaker or the writer or the performer or the artist. So what role does that person play to the audience? Oftentimes, personas are much more important than the actual person. Actors will often have a public face, or not just actors, but popular people will have a public face, and it's very similar to everybody else. Think of how you interact on social media. Is that really you, or is that a persona of who you want people to believe that you are? So you want to try to dig down to who that person is to the audience, which leads us to our very last element, which is the audience itself. Who is the audience? And this is another one that we can break down to primary and secondary functions. So, oops, a little bit too far forward, but oftentimes you'll need to figure out, like, who is this person, this persona speaking primarily to, and then who are they speaking secondarily to. Lastly, sorry, I skipped ahead, is the subject. So, what is this about? What is the piece of rhetoric about? Not what is it accomplishing, that's the purpose, right? Or what is it attempting to accomplish, that's the purpose, but just what is it about in general. And then oftentimes we'll have an explicit and an implicit purpose. Subject. So if, for example, this is relevant right now at the time of recording, if the subject of the governor's speech is coronavirus, then if the explicit subject of the governor's speech is coronavirus, then the implicit subject of the speech may be uh, what we can do to prevent its spread, right? Um, so he may be talking explicitly about the virus, but then he's implying that he's implying certain actions need to be taken. So those are the elements of the rhetorical situation: understanding what type of language it is, and then breaking down the different parts of how, under the different circumstances under which the language was created: the occasion, the context, the purpose, the persona, the audience, and the subject. And that will allow you to see different decisions that the author will make, which we'll talk about in a future video. Now, this is a lot of information. So there is, if you can remember that the purpose is persuasive, and you can identify the type of um, language that it is, but you're struggling with all those different aspects of, like, subject and purpose and yada yada yada, then an easier way to remember how to break down the rhetorical situation is to remember the acronym SOAPS, which stands for subject, occasion, audience, purpose, and speaker. Um, and those are all just different situational elements, slightly different than what I presented on the previous slide, but fairly similar. So, for example, if I were to do a SOAPs on this piece of media, right? Like, what I'm doing is a piece of rhetoric. What I'm giving you right now is a piece of rhetoric. If I were to break this down in terms of SOAPs, then I could say that the explicit subject of this piece of media is, or this piece of rhetoric is, to cover the rhetorical situation, whereas the implicit subject of this rhetorical piece of media is the AP language test and the elements of the AP language test and what you're going to need to know for it. If I were to do the same for the occasion, then I could say, well, the occasion is, this is a YouTube video of a PowerPoint. It's a school assignment. The occasion is you're trying to figure out note taking. It's taking place during the 2020 coronavirus quarantine. Although you may be watching it sometime in the future as well. That's the occasion right now. How are people feeling about this? Well, right now people are, immediately using it as just a form of review that they may need. But you in the future may also be using it as a study guide without that context of the coronavirus. So then if we look at this, who's the audience? Well, the primary audience are students of my class at the time of the quarantine, right? But it also may be students of my class in the future, whereas my secondary audience are going to be parents and colleagues and perhaps curious watchers of this video, just any random person who decides to watch an unprofessional YouTube video about the AP language exam. But as much as this is for the primary audience, the way that I'm presenting also has to take into account that other people are going to watch it and hopefully not think I'm a complete doofus or idiot. What is the purpose of the speech? Well, the purpose of the speech, my primary purpose of the speech, is to, again, it's persuasive. It's to persuade you to start thinking deeper about language, right? Like, that's what I really want you to do, is to start realizing that there are all these different elements to language. Secondarily, I'm informing you about how to do that, right? Now, again, a lot of people will say, no, 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 the informational part is primary, whereas in reality it's not, because ultimately what I want you to do is to start thinking deeper about language, and I'm doing that by informing you. So the primary purpose is still persuasive. Finally, the speaker is Mr. Lassard. It's me. I am speaking to you as an English teacher. I'm not speaking to you as a brother or a spouse or as a friend. I'm speaking to you as the bit of a stick in the mud English teacher that I am. With all of that in mind, hopefully you've had this opportunity now to make some insights, to make some notes, to remember certain things, and if this is the first time that you're learning all of this, to realize certain things about language as we move forward. I look forward to seeing you in a future video.